In November 1944, a battalion of American tanks rolled up to the front line in France, and the soldiers already there stopped what they were doing to stare. Not because of the tanks, because of the men inside them. 700 soldiers, every one of them black. The first African-American tank battalion ever sent into combat by the United States Army. And almost every white officer up that chain of command had said the same thing about them. They will break. They will run. They are not built for this. The Army had spent 2 years keeping them out of the war. They had been trained, equipped, and then left to sit. A unit nobody wanted to claim, and then one general asked for them by name. His name was George S. Patton, and what he did in the 4 minutes he stood in front of those men changed how an entire army would remember them. This is the story of the 761st Tank Battalion, and it is all in the official record. The 761st Tank Battalion was activated on April 1, 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. From the first day, they carried a weight no other tank unit carried. This was a segregated army. The official position of much of the senior command was simple and openly stated. Black soldiers did not have the intelligence, the nerve, or the discipline to operate armor in combat. Tanks, they argued, were too complex. Battle was too chaotic. So the 761st was given a different job to prove a point its own army did not want proven. They trained at Camp Hood, Texas. They trained longer and harder than almost any armored unit in the country because they understood something their instructors said out loud. Any mistake would not be called a mistake. It would be called proof. They drilled until they were, by the measurement of their own training scores, one of the best prepared tank battalions in the United States Army. And still, the war went on without them. D-Day came and went, unit after unit shipped to Europe. The 761st sat in Texas watching. They even had for a time a young lieutenant in their ranks named Jackie Robinson, the man who would later break baseball's color barrier. He never deployed with them, but the unit he briefly belonged to was about to make history of its own. The battalion adopted a motto, 2 words, "Come out fighting." By the autumn of 1944, General George S. Patton had a problem. His Third Army was tearing across France faster than almost anyone believed possible, and that speed was burning through his armored units. Tanks were being knocked out. Crews were being lost. Patton needed trained tankers, and he needed them now. Patton was, by any honest measure, a man of his time, and his recorded views on race were often harsh and offensive by any standard. But Patton had one quality that in this moment mattered more than his prejudices. He cared above almost everything about winning, and he had been told there was a fully trained, combat-ready tank battalion sitting unused in Texas. He didn't care who told him they would fail. He sent for the 700 B-61st. In late October 1944, the battalion finally crossed into France. And on a cold morning at the front, the men of the 761st were ordered to form up. A convoy approached. Out of it stepped the most recognizable general in the American Army. Patton climbed up onto the hood of a vehicle so every man could see him. 700 soldiers stood in the cold and waited to hear what the legend would say about them. What Patton said next was remembered, written down, and repeated by the men who stood there for the rest of their lives. He told them the truth, bluntly, the way Patton told everyone everything. He told them they were the first black tankers ever to fight in the American Army. He told them the eyes of their people and the eyes of the whole country were on them. And then he said the part that those men never forgot. He told them he would never have asked for them if they were not good. He said he had nothing but the best in his army, and he said he did not care what color they were as long as they went up the line and killed the enemy. For soldiers who had spent 2 years being told officially and to their faces that they were not good enough to hear the most famous general in America say, "I asked for you because you are the best I could get." That was not a speech. That was a door finally opening. One veteran of the 761st put it simply years later. He said no one had ever talked to them like soldiers before. Patton did. And then Patton did something more important than talk. He sent them into the fight. The 761st Tank Battalion entered combat in early November 1944, and the prediction that they would break did not just fail. It failed completely, and in front of everyone. They fought through France. They fought through the brutal cold of the Battle of the Bulge, when Hitler's last great offensive nearly split the Allied line. They were among the units that helped breach the Siegfried Line, the fortified wall guarding Germany itself. They did not fight for a week or a month. The 761st was in nearly continuous combat for 183 days. The cost was real. They took heavy casualties, they lost tanks, and they lost men. Men who had trained for years just to be allowed to die for a country that had not yet decided to treat them as equal. And in the middle of that fighting stood a man named Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. During the advance, Rivers's tank hit a mine. His leg was torn open to the bone. The medics wanted to evacuate him. A wound like that was a ticket home, an honorable, fully justified ticket home. Rivers refused it. He took command of another tank and stayed in the fight for days, leading from the front with a wound that should have hospitalized him. On November 19, 1944, while deliberately drawing German fire onto his own tank to protect the rest of his company, Reuben Rivers was killed. His commanding officer recommended him for the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor. Here is the part of the story that should make every viewer pause. Reuben Rivers earned the Medal of Honor in 1944. He did not receive it. The recommendation simply disappeared into the system. And it was not only Rivers. Across the entire Second World War, a war in which more than 1 million Black Americans served, not a single African American soldier was awarded the Medal of Honor at the time. Not one. The 761st came home in 1945 to a country still segregated. The men who had helped break the Siegfried Line went back to states where they could not vote, could not eat at the same counters, could not be buried in the same cemeteries as the white soldiers they had fought beside. For decades, the official record stayed quiet about them. It took until 1978, 33 years after the war, for the 761st Tank Battalion to finally receive the Presidential Unit citation it had earned in combat. And it took until 1997, 52 years after the war ended, for the United States to finally review the record and award the Medal of Honor to 7 black soldiers of World War II who had been passed over because of their race. One of those 7 was Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. His family accepted the medal on his behalf, half a century late, but the record at last told the truth. The men who said the 761st would break were wrong, completely, provably, historically wrong. The battalion that nobody wanted fought longer, bled harder, and advanced farther than almost anyone expected of any unit in Patton's army. They did not just earn their place in the war. They forced a country to look at what it had been told was impossible and admit it had been lied to. Patton was no saint, and this story does not pretend he was. But on one cold morning in France, when it would have cost him nothing to keep ignoring 700 trained soldiers, he asked for them instead. He told them they were the best he could get, and they spent the next 183 days proving him right. History remembers Patton for the pearl-handled pistols and the speeches. But maybe the truest thing he ever did was look at the unit his own army had thrown away and send it into the fight as equals. The 761st Tank Battalion come out fighting. If this story moved you, if you believe these men should never be forgotten again, drop a single word in the comments. Remembered and subscribe to Military History Talks, because if we don't tell these stories, the record stays quiet. We'll see you next time.